Welcome, everyone. Welcome if you're joining us on Zoom or on the YouTube Live. We're going to wait a couple minutes as people are joining, but we're really glad to have you here for this event, 3 years of silence and negligence, justice for Kanjuruhan. So welcome. We're very glad to have you.
Yeah.
Before I introduce our program and speakers, just a logistical announcement. Speakers will be speaking in Indonesian and in English, but we have simultaneous translation. So if you're like me and have not learned Bahasa yet, you can go at the bottom of the screen to the right, and there'll either be an option for interpretation or three dots where you can click and there pick English if that's your language or Bahasa if that's your language. I'm wondering if Nadine, I can ask you to share that in Indonesian as well.
Okay, I'll share this in Indonesian. Selamat malam teman-teman yang join lewat Zoom. Terima kasih sudah menyempatkan waktunya untuk ikut dalam webinar dalam peringatan 3 tahun Kanjuruhan. Dan webinar ini kita menyediakan interpretasi dalam bahasa Inggris dan bahasa Indonesia. Jadi bagi kawan-kawan yang ingin langsung mendengar interpretasinya dalam bahasa Indonesia, teman-teman bisa em, langsung ke bagian bawah Zoom. Itu ada tulisan interpretation. Teman-teman bisa klik itu, lalu bisa klik option bahasa Indonesia, sudah disetting. Kalau misalkan feature interpretation nggak langsung ketemu, teman-teman bisa buka 3 dot, 3 titik di sebelah beberapa feature lainnya, teman-teman bisa klik, lalu teman-teman bisa klik interpretation, nanti bisa pilih bahasa Indonesia. So that's from my end, Laura, back to you.
Thank you so much, Nadine. So once again, welcome to everyone, whether it's morning or evening for you, wherever you are. My name is Laura Cauer Garcia, and I'm the program manager for Civic Space at INCLO, which is a network of national civil liberties organizations committed to working with each other, supporting each other to defend and strengthen civil liberties and human rights. We're really privileged to count with Contras as one of our members, and we have been following their tireless and courageous work around advocacy for this Kanjuruhan tragedy, which brings us here today, but many other human rights issues in Indonesia. There'll be a time for questions for Q&A at the end of the event, but I really want to encourage you to add your questions and your comments in the chat throughout the event. That way we can gather them and then address them at the very end. And so to not take more time, so I welcome you. We've titled, the title of this event that Contras is organizing is 3 years of silence and negligence, justice for Kanjuruhan. And that's because on the night of the 1st of October of 2022, in the Kanjuruhan Stadium in Malang, East Java, we witnessed one of the deadliest football disasters in the 21st century. Following a football match between two teams, Arema FC and Persebaya Surabaya, security forces launched a really excessive use of tear gas, a crowd control weapon that is one of the most common, but not for that reason, very dangerous. And it caused a stampede that killed at least 135 individuals and injured hundreds of them, many of them children and women. And despite the huge scale of this tragedy and public outcry, which made it, internationally, the response from the government has been lackluster, has been marked by systemic failures. We're here today because we stand in solidarity with victims and their families and demand justice, but also because the Kanjuruhan tragedy is not just an isolated incident of football mismanagement, but an example of impunity in other aspects of state-led violence, police militarization, and the absence of legal guarantees for core rights like the right to life, to protest, etc. We are, very lucky to be hearing from a lot of people involved. So we will hear from family members of victims and their lawyers and their long road to justice. We will learn more about how the legal systems and institutions in Indonesia have failed to provide accountability. As I mentioned, how this use of crowd control weapons, although in a sports event, mirrors concerns we have about police management of crowds. And that's something that's, very kind of recent in our eyes in terms of the human rights situation in Indonesia. And we're also joined by international experts that will share their experiences and recommendations from other countries. But to get us started first, we would like to share a short video that would kind of go over this event. It's 6 minutes long, and it's not graphic, but if you think you can be triggered or anything, the most important thing is that you take care of yourself so you can always join back after 6 minutes.
Temuan itu sendiri, bahwa memang dari hasil interview atau wawancara kami kepada beberapa pihak saksi, memang dinyatakan bahwa sebetulnya tidak ada niatan untuk melakukan kerusuhan sama sekali, tapi hanya sebatas untuk melakukan dukungan moral, tetapi tiba-tiba disambut dengan meringsanya masuk para aparat kepolisian ke dalam lapangan, termasuk dengan prajurit TNI juga.
awal kami juga melihat bahwa ada prosedur yang tidak dilalui secara benar oleh ya. Masuk salah satunya adalah rekap penggunaan kekuatan yang dimana ketika memang ada satu keamanan, polisi itu harus melewati tahap-tahap tertentu. Tapi dalam konteks kasus ini kami melihat polisi langsung menggunakan penembakan gas air mata.
Dari temuan awal kami bahwa berkaitan dengan penembakan gas air mata dilakukan tidak hanya di dalam stadion, tetapi juga dilakukan di luar stadion. Kami menduga
Laura, the floor is back to you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Nadine. So after watching the video and witnessing the level of that tragedy, there's still questions as to why this is a human rights issue. And I think that's where I want to turn the mic to Nadine, who's part of the international advocacy staff of Contras, that can kind of pull us back a bit, give us this context as to why this is a human rights issue and how that fits with a wider context of systematic and recurring patterns of state violence and this issue of impunity that hits so hard currently in Indonesia. So Nadine, if I can ask you to take it away.
Yes. Thank you very much, Laura. Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for having me here, and thank you very much for also taking your time in participating and also giving your solidarity to the third year commemoration of Kanjuruhan tragedy. I'm Nadine from the Commission for the Disappeared and Victims of Violence Contras Indonesia. Tonight, we gather not only to remember the 135 lives lost at Kanjuruhan Stadium on the 1st of October 2022, as illustrated in the video screening, but also to demand justice after 3 years of silence and negligence from the state. I would like to also use this space in highlighting that what happened in that night was not a football incident framed in our local, national, and international news for only days, weeks, and also months, but it was a strong signal to us of a result to the recklessness and ongoing state violence, and it is being remaining to be perpetuated and also nurtured. Kanjuruhan tragedy is not a simple case to our end, but rather a continuous pattern of unlawful and indiscriminate use of crowd control weapons. Contrast, we recently published a research report specifically entitled Crowd Control Out of Control. which highlights the alarming findings of the unlawful use of crowd control weapons by the Indonesian National Police, as occurred in Kanjuruhan. In our research, we documented that just between 2019 and 2024, there were 69 incidents involving crowd control weapons. And usually, it's being done by the unlawful use of tear gas, rubber bullets, and also water cannons in police's crowd controlling. This incident left not one, not 50 or 100, but 718 people injured and 30 people killed. This is outside the number which occurred in Kanjuruhan, resulting to 135 lives lost. And tear gas here is the prima donna. Tear gas was the most misused weapons with 59 documented cases. The irony stands where these weapons are often called less lethal, but instead they are lethal. And in reality, they have been oftenly used recklessly, excessively, as they have taken not only lives, but also traumatized the victims and also family victims. And this is exactly what happened in Kanjuruhan. Tear gas, and what happened there was that police used expired tear gas, to be exact, to fire to the confined stadium, the confined space, as illustrated in the video, in direct violation to the FIFA's regulation and also international human rights standards. And in case, and instead of using this as a last resort, it was deployed immediately without any practices of negotiation and practices of de-escalation as supposed to be practiced in our crowd controlling regulation. This case alone shows how crowd control weapons have become tools of torture and indiscriminate violence rather than instruments of safety. And Kanjuruhan, as Laura mentioned earlier, is not an isolated tragedy. It is a part of a larger pattern of militarized policing in Indonesia. And we have witnessed this in many, many cases in Indonesia. In 2019, for example, there's this big protest of the problematic revision of the Indonesia's criminal code. Then in 2020, a protest against the omnibus law, in which both events in this mentioned times resulted in deaths and serious injuries, not with live bullets, but with crowd control weapons. And what happened also recently is 2023, the Rempang Developmental Project protest. And also in 2024, the Peringatan Darurat protest, a nationwide protest in 13 provinces in Indonesia, emerged after a corrupted practice of election processes were met with the same excessive force of tear gas, rubber bullets, and also water cannons. And it should be noted here that the victims of this excessive deployment of crowd control weapons are not only protesters who were affected. There are women, there are children, there are bystanders of the protests. And for example, in a protest emerged in August 2024 in one of the regions of Indonesia, Semarang, a tear gas was shot, and this affected not only protesters who were seeking for protection, but it also affected children and even infants and babies who were left unconscious when tear gas struck a mall. It also struck many children who were in mosques just reading their Holy Quran. So this is inane. And this shows us two things. First, the violence is systematic, it is not accidental. And second is that it is indiscriminate. It harms the entire communities. And instead of being trained to negotiate and protect citizens, now the Indonesian National Police are funded to repress. In fact, the Indonesian Corruption Watch documented that there are at least 3.8 trillion of our taxes in Indonesia was spent to crowd control gear, shields, batons, tear gas launchers, while peaceful dialogues remain nowhere to be seen. And my last part is that this research that we did at launch makes a clear point that the recurring pattern is enabled by a systematic failures of every regulations that are supposed to be a guidance of police conduct in crowd controlling. We take note that a lot of police regulations has yet aligned with even the existing international human rights standards. For example, the UN Code of Conduct for law enforcement officers, and also UN human rights guidance on less lethal weapons in law enforcement. For example, the Indonesian Chief of Police Regulation number 6 of 2006 on crowd controlling did set out stages of crowd controlling. It went for prevention, it should use negotiation in dispersing crowds, verbal warnings, and then one to another, it should be led to crowd control weapon. However, the practices itself is very unclear, inconsistent, and often contradictory. Um, we can take, for example, in one of the articles in the regulation, which authorizes that tear gas when can be used when a protest turns disorder, but the regulation itself is giving no clear definition or standard. What is disorder? Hence, this is very much potential to become a misuse of term by the police officials that often occur in many protest acts. And the result is that officers have wide discretion, they have little accountability, and every justification to skip steps and the use of fire chemical weapons are the first resort to disperse the mass. In other words, the law itself enables abuse. And when combined with weak oversight, the guarantees of victims to tragedies like Kanjuruhan, the thing happened in Semarang, in Rempang, will continue to happen. And as Laura also mentioned, impunity prevails. Now, the Kanjuruhan tragedy is more than a story of a football mismanagement. It is a story of state violence, systematic negligence, and the absence of guarantees of our basic rights, of accountability, of reformation, and also guarantees. One last thing from my end is that Kanjuruhan must not be forgotten. The 135 lives lost is not just a number. If the state refuses to deliver justice for this tragedy, then it is not only the Arema supporters who are at risk. It is not only the victims of Kanjuruhan tragedies who are at risk, but every Indonesian citizens who dare to state and who dare to speak, to step into the public space. So justice for Kanjuruhan is justice for all of us. Thank you very much, Laura. Giving back to you.
Thank you, Nadine, for that. And there's so many important points to pull for that. So I'm hoping that folks have their questions and have their comments. It raises so many questions of if we know of the dangers of some of these weapons, if we know that there are certain protocols and then that are not kind of followed, is this a matter of kind of the culture, a culture of policing that see, citizens not as someone that has to be protected, but perhaps as an enemy? That dichotomy that you say of what should be a de-escalation almost feels like a punishment. And what happens then when there aren't these accountability mechanisms? So I want to turn now to Daniel, who's been the lawyer accompanying families seeking justice, that can explain what the process has been and the challenges, but also if there have been some wins within that, so we can kind of start honing in on this specific experience. Daniel, I'll turn to you. You have 7 minutes.
Oke, well, thanks Laura, dan terima kasih untuk semuanya, para panelis dan interpreter. 3 tahun Kanjuruhan tanpa adanya keadilan, 3 tahun juga ada pembungkaman dan pengabaian terhadap hak-hak korban. Jadi dalam kesempatan ini saya mau bilang bahwa negara sedang menghina, sedang menginjak-injak, ya, prinsip negara hukum yang demokratis, prinsip pemenuhan dan supremasi hak asasi manusia. Kenapa? Karena sejak awal kami melihat lembaga bantuan hukum dan bersama Kontras juga melihat bahwa ruang impunitas itu masih sangat kuat dalam pengungkapan tragedi Kanjuruhan. Sejak awal kami dalam upaya hukum berdasarkan pengalaman yang kami lakukan, ada upaya untuk menutup-nutupi keterlibatan pelaku-pelaku yang seharusnya bertanggung jawab. Sejak level pengadilan, korban, keluarga korban, saksi, itu tidak diberikan akses untuk bersaksi di depan persidangan. Jadi satu fakta, ketika sidang yang digelar di Pengadilan Negeri Surabaya, korban, keluarga korban, saksi tidak diberikan akses untuk bersaksi di persidangan. Dan seperti kita tahu, dalam persidangan, ketika kami mendampingi saksi maupun keluarga korban, ada 2 dari panitia penyelenggara, yang kelima terpidana ini tidak lebih daripada 3 tahun. Hukumannya tidak lebih daripada 3 tahun. Yang pada saat itu juga putusan pengadilan itu ya tanggal 16 Maret 2023 seakan menjadi legitimasi bahwa kekerasan dilakukan oleh negara, seakan kekerasan dilakukan oleh negara itu boleh dilakukan dengan konsekuensi mendapatkan hukuman yang sangat ringan dan tidak memenuhi rasa keadilan bagi korban. Selain itu juga upaya yang pernah kita lakukan adalah melingkupi permohonan restitusi ya yang diajukan kepada Pengadilan Negeri Surabaya per Oktober 2023 yang sama-sama kita tahu per Maret 2025 kemarin penetapan restitusi itu sangat menghina ya, menginjak-injak harkat martabat korban pelanggaran hak asasi manusia. Di tiap proses persidangan tidak ada pertimbangan hak asasi manusia yang diutarakan oleh hakim, jaksa penuntut umum. Bahkan kami bersama Kontras gitu ya sering bersurat gitu ya kepada pengadilan mengirimkan amicus curiae bagaimana pertimbangan hak asasi manusia itu bisa dijadikan satu acuan utama dalam memutus suatu perkara, terutama di Kanjuruhan ini. Jadi perspektif hak asasi manusia itu tidak terlihat dalam putusan pengadilan sampai kepada tingkat kasasi. Berdasarkan pengalaman juga keluarga korban yang hari ini ada Mas Rizal Putra Pratama juga mengajukan laporan kepada Polres Malang Kabupaten yang pada saat ini beralih ke Barreskrim tidak ditindaklanjuti secara serius. Jadi bisa kita lihat bagaimana sebenarnya kepolisian Republik Indonesia hari ini seakan menutup-nutupi ataupun menghalang-halangi proses korban untuk mencari keadilan dengan jalannya. Gitu. Tidak berdasarkan pengalaman juga kita bersama Kontras dan Koalisi Masyarakat Sipil juga sejak awal mendesak ini bukan hanya peristiwa bencana alam, bukan hanya peristiwa pidana biasa, bukan hanya peristiwa kriminal biasa, melainkan ini satu bentuk peristiwa pelanggaran berat terhadap hak asasi manusia, pelanggaran berat terhadap hak asasi manusia, yang dimana hal ini justru masih menjadi tantangan yang serius bagaimana Komisi Nasional Hak Asasi Manusia Indonesia enggan untuk melakukan penyelidikan ulang terhadap pelanggaran HAM berat di tragedi Kanjuruhan. Sore ini kami baru dari Komnas HAM dan memang untuk PR ke depan adalah bagaimana memastikan Komnas HAM meninjau ulang, mempelajari ulang kasus tragedi Kanjuruhan agar dapat dimasukkan dalam proses pro justisia tragedi Kanjuruhan sebagai pelanggaran HAM berat. Nah, berdasarkan pengalaman itu kami melihat ada beberapa kegagalan sistemik ya yang dilakukan oleh negara dalam menjamin hak korban atas keadilan. Kalau kita lihat kegagalan sistemik itu bisa kita lihat bahwa praktik impunitas itu masih kuat dan berlaku di Indonesia. Kenapa? Karena sampai sekarang aktor level atas tidak pernah diusut. Aktor level atas baik itu korporasi, PSSI ya sebagai induk Federasi Sepak Bola Indonesia, baik itu dari manajemen ya Arema FC maupun di level liga itu tidak pernah diusut, dan juga kepolisian yang memberikan kewenangan, yang mempunyai kewenangan dan pengendalian strategis di Kanjuruhan itu tidak pernah diusut dalam peristiwa tragedi 1 Oktober. Nah, ruang impunitas ini juga menguat seiring dengan lemahnya akuntabilitas penegakan hukum. Lemahnya akuntabilitas penegakan hukum terhadap aparat yang melakukan kekerasan. Dapat kita lihat bahwa selama 3 tahun ini tidak ada yang mengetahui siapa aparat yang melakukan penembakan gas air mata ke bagian tribun. Penembakan gas air mata yang menyebabkan ratusan korban jiwa melayang dan ratusan luka-luka. Ini bisa kita lihat lemahnya akuntabilitas penegakan hukum ini, sehingga kalau kita lihat dalam kegagalan sistemik ini berdasarkan instrumen hak asasi manusia internasional, kita lihat ada standar hak korban, hak atas kebenaran, hak atas keadilan, dan hak atas pemulihan sama sekali belum dipenuhi oleh negara. Hak atas kebenaran masih disembunyikan oleh negara. Hak atas kebenaran masih ditutup-tutupi oleh negara dengan alasan untuk melindungi pelaku level atas, dengan alasan untuk melindungi aparat yang melakukan kekerasan. Dan kemudian hak atas keadilan negara sampai sekarang melalui mekanisme lembaga peradilan tidak pernah menjamin adanya akses peradilan yang fair, yang memihak kepada keluarga korban, yang memberikan rasa keadilan bagi pada keluarga korban. Serta hak atas pemulihan, bisa kita lihat hari ini salah satu bagian dari hak atas pemulihan adalah restitusi, yang kemarin sudah dalam penetapan banding di Pengadilan Negeri Surabaya. Nilai nominal ganti kerugiannya sangat menghina keluarga korban, dan kemudian tidak ada pertimbangan di situ tentang soal jaminan ketidakberulangan, menjadi satu pertanda 3 tahun ini negara masih abai dalam penuntasan kasus tragedi Kanjuruhan. Negara juga masih abai dalam memenuhi hak atas kebenaran, hak atas keadilan, dan juga hak atas pemulihan korban Kanjuruhan, dan terutama pada masyarakat Indonesia secara umum. Jadi terakhir, Laura, dalam kesempatan ini Indonesia sedang mengalami ada namanya tren reformasi Polri yang sering digaungkan, yang sering dimasifkan oleh Presiden maupun Kepala Kepolisian. Bagi kami, reformasi Polri itu adalah omong kosong, ya. Reformasi Polri adalah omong kosong apabila reformasi tersebut tidak dibarengi dengan komitmen pengusut tuntas terhadap tragedi Kanjuruhan. Reformasi Polri hanyalah omong kosong ketika komitmen tersebut tidak dibarengi dengan akuntabilitas penegakan hukum terhadap aparat yang melakukan kekerasan. Reformasi Polri juga adalah omong kosong ketika langgengnya praktik impunitas itu masih berlaku di Indonesia, terutama adalah kepada aparat yang melakukan kekerasan. Well, terima kasih sebelumnya atas kesempatannya. Saya kembalikan ke Laura. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Daniel. And I think it comes out very clearly not only how difficult the process is, but how frustrating as well, especially to add when human rights institutions like Komnas HAM are not, part of a solution or even aiding that. And maybe there is an opportunity there from the international community to push, to put some pressure and to bring more light to that. But the other thing that I was left with what you were saying is the importance, how essential it is for sort of human rights standards to be at the center of it. And besides human rights standards, to have the stories of and the experiences of families of victims and victims at the core. And so we're very lucky and privileged to have a family member who lost two family members in this tragedy, Rizal Putra, who has been working tirelessly for justice. And so I want to welcome Rizal here to hear about his experience, his story, and what that process has been very, very personally.
Halo, selamat malam semuanya. Perkenalkan, nama saya Rizal Putra Pratama, keluarga korban Kanjuruhan yang telah kehilangan ayah saya, kedua adik saya. Saya juga korban selamat yang menyaksikan pertandingan di sana, mengalami tembakan geser mata yang saya rasakan seperti apa. Tenggorokan saya terasa sakit seperti disilet. Ya, ini adalah pengalaman yang sangat buruk yang saya rasakan karena saya telah kehilangan tulang punggung keluarga, kehilangan kedua adik saya yang masih kecil-kecil, yang masa depan mereka masih sangat panjang. Dan selama hari demi hari sudah kita lewati, bahkan sampai 3 tahun ini keluarga korban tragedi Kanjuruhan masih belum mendapatkan keadilan, dan tindakan represif kepolisian itu masih melakukan hal yang sama. Apalagi baru-baru kemarin di Indonesia ini terjadi ada Afan Kurniawan, dari kebrutalan polisi seperti itu, dan polisi ya perlu direformasi semuanya kayak gitu. Kalau kasus Kanjuruhan ini belum terselesaikan, pastinya tindakan negara ataupun kepolisian akan melakukan hal yang sama di kemudian hari, dan di masa yang akan datang seperti itu. Ya sampai saat ini kalau yang saya rasakan keluarga korban sendiri yang di Malang juga, jadi keluarga korban itu dipecah belah. Jadi ada keluarga korban kesejahteraan, keluarga korban keadilan yang sudah dikondisikan oleh aparat kepolisian, oleh pemerintahan juga seperti itu. Dan saya keluarga korban dampingan LBH tetap tegak lurus di jalur keadilan, tetap sampai titik darah penghabisan saya akan berjuang seperti itu sih. Dan harapan saya ya semoga keadilan ini bisa ditegakkan seadil-adilnya. Ya saya berterima kasih kepada semuanya yang hadir di sini, dan saya meminta untuk tetap merawat ingatan dan tidak akan lupakan tragedi Kanjuruhan, karena ya harus kita suarakan, karena kalau kasus ini belum terselesaikan kemungkinan di masa yang akan datang akan terjadi tragedi-tragedi yang akan menimpa di negara ini. Seperti itu sih. Terima kasih.
Thank you so much, Rizal, for joining and for sharing your story, both as a survivor as well as someone fighting for justice for your family members. And I'm so kind of heartened also by these demands that are not just for justice for this event, but ensuring that this does not happen again, right? One life lost is one life too many. And we're talking about numbers that are horrific, of families really kind of, torn, and that is something that will remain for a very long time. So that demand that this should have never happened and that it should never happen again. And so we've had the possibility of hearing from 3 different speakers, from the perspective of Indonesia. And now we want to turn the gaze and the reflections to internationally. And this is something I truly believe in that looking at experiences from other countries first can give us the argument that this is not an exception, right? There can be a consistent pattern of human rights issues, as we've seen with concerns about crowd control weapons or the way policing engages. But I also think there's opportunities to learn lessons from others. And so we have 2 experts here today, that come from 2 countries that have a very strong football or soccer practice, however you say it. So first, I want to turn to Pete Weatherby, from the Hillsborough Law, from the UK. Pete, I'll turn to you.
Thanks very much indeed, and good evening, everyone. I hope you can hear me. I'm a barrister, a human rights advocate based in Manchester, England. I've represented many bereaved families resulting from disasters and scandals, and in particular, many of the Hillsborough families, and I'll talk about those in a minute. And I've also worked internationally. I was on the UEFA international panel that looked into the near disaster of the 2022 Champions League final and found both state forces and UEFA itself at fault for what nearly turned into a mass disaster. So 1989, semi-final of the English FA Cup, Liverpool versus Nottingham Forest at a neutral ground, Hillsborough in Sheffield. And due to catastrophic and unforced gross negligence by the police commanders, 97 people were crushed to death and hundreds more severely injured. Some of those who died could have survived if there had been a competent emergency response. There wasn't. Before some of those who died had actually expired, the senior police leaders embarked on an industrial scale cover-up. Within hours, the chief constable had set up 2 teams, one to put out a false account of what had happened, and the other to ensure that the police evidence was consistent with that false account and not the truth. The loss of the families of the 97 and those who survived the disaster was incalculable, of course, and as you will know, of course, from the Kanjuruhan disaster itself. The ensuing cover-up massively compounded those losses and shocked the conscience of the country. It hid the truth for more than 2 decades and shamelessly blamed those who died and their friends for what had happened. So what did happen? How was it unravelled? and what are the lessons from it? Well, the context of the disaster was an aging stadium and a mindset by the authorities, mainly the police, but also the football authorities and politicians, which treated sports supporters like cattle. They were not customers, but seen as a threat to be penned and controlled. In short, the safety arrangements on the day were grossly defective. Hundreds of supporters were corralled into pens from which there was no escape at the direction of senior officers. Due to the cover-up, the original inquests returned accident verdicts. The police, the media, politicians all blamed drunk supporters who turned up late and many without tickets. The families, the survivors and their supporters were outraged, and there was a massive and persistent campaign with multiple legal challenges and reviews for 20 years without success. But eventually, the unrelenting pressure from the families and their campaign, the government gave way and ordered disclosure of many important documents, and a subsequent review started to unpick the falsehoods. By 2014, the original verdicts had been overturned, and there were new inquests where the families were fully represented, and a jury saw all of the footage and documentation and heard evidence over 2 years. Importantly, there were hundreds of hours of footage, and a number of police officers and others broke ranks and told the truth. There was no evidence of drunkenness. The number of people admitted to the ground was no more than the number of tickets sold. The pattern of supporters arriving was normal for similar matches. No evidence of lateness. There was no hooliganism. On all fronts, the cover-up was exposed and debunked. It had been an audacious web of lies, and it's testament to the adage that if you're going to tell a lie, tell a big one and people will believe it. It had survived because the victims were denigrated as hooligans and because senior public servants, police officers, politicians, and a compliant media had conspired to tell those lies. In 2016, the new inquests found that the 97 had been unlawfully killed by the gross negligence of police commanders, that the club and other public agencies had also failed, and that neither the deceased nor the survivors had contributed in any way to the disaster. This was an important victory for the families, for the survivors, for the public. It shook the system to its core and hugely undermined public confidence in public authorities and the justice system itself. The families, through their persistence, their campaigning, their dignity, had scored an historic success. But the story did not end there, regrettably, because there are many other victims of disasters and state wrongdoing who suffered similar fates, not just through negligence and failure, but a prevalent culture of covering up. Putting reputation above truth is not the exception, but the norm. The families therefore continued their campaign and still do to this day, seeking new laws dubbed the Hillsborough Law, which will prevent, so far as possible, cover-ups from being perpetrated in the future. It's been a long road, a very long road, because there's huge opposition from those who might be prevented from hiding the truth. But I'm pleased to be able to say that just 2 weeks ago, the current government put Hillsborough Law before the UK Parliament. There's a distance still to go, but it's now in process. If it can be kept on the tracks, then the Hillsborough families and many families who've been affected subsequently by similar cover-ups in other circumstances will have scored a huge victory. The new law will firstly criminalise public servants misleading the public. Secondly, it will require public authorities, public servants, corporations with responsibilities to the public to proactively assist official investigations when things do go wrong, and crucially to identify their own failures, again on pain of committing an offence if they do not. And thirdly, the new law provides a level playing field for legal representation for families where the state is represented in such investigations. As one of the lawyers involved in all this, I've acted and advised across many countries and jurisdictions. These are problems which commonly occur. We have common cause, and we express not just sorrow and regret at the losses endured by the Kanjuruhan families and survivors, but solidarity with them in their search for justice, truth, and change to prevent what happened to them occurring to others. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Pete. And what a privilege to just hear from you about this long and tireless fight. 20 years, you said, and I kind of felt chills. And what an uphill battle too, when it was not only kind of fighting that particular, but a narrative that was built to shame victims and their friends, as you meant. So that was something that had to be fought. And against a number of actors that were either working on that cover up or weren't helping in that. And I think the mention of media and politicians, we forget the wide array of actors that can be either a block or could be an aid in that process. So thank you so much for sharing this experience with us, Pete. And now I'm going to move to another part of the world, and I'm going to move to Argentina, where I'm from. And we have Eric with us, who is an expert on security and sports, to give us a different perspective of what it means to make efforts to ensure that these sort of accidents, tragedies do not happen. What can be what are experiences that have already happened in Argentina, and what are things that we can consider to prevent them in the future?
Thank you, Laura. Thank you everybody for having me, and well, have a good day. And in these 8 minutes, which I'm going to start right now, sorry, because if not, I'm able to speak 20 or 50 minutes. But so it's 8 minutes, Eric. Focus. Well, first, I would like to give you an overview about the football-related violence in Argentina, because you will find a lot of things that are very similar to what happened in the UK and what happened in Indonesia. And maybe the timelines are a little bit offset. Maybe Indonesia is going, and Contras will be able to go into a motion in which we are right now, with getting better, and we are trying to get to where the UK got, where things are much better. So basically we had, well, football in Argentina is not only about Messi and Maradona. We have a dark side. We have 350 fatal victims in our history. That's a massive amount of people in the past century, in the beginning of this century. 350 people died in football-related violence. The particular thing in Argentina is that our Hillsborough, our crowd crush, our Kanjuruhan happened in 1968, where in the River Plate Stadium, which is the biggest stadium in Argentina, there was a crowd crush. The thing is that it was in the middle of a very dark period in Argentinian history, in the middle of a period where there were a lot of dictatorships, and the next day everything was gone. Many people say what happened actually was that people got crushed at the exit, and we don't really know what happened. Most of the people that the witnesses that are still alive and that were contacted after many years after that, once we came back into democracy, said that it was police brutality at the doors that caused the crush. Like, people were going out, people were battooned, and they went back, and they started to pile up. After that, we entered in a very dark era, where we have hooligans, groups within our fans, which exacerbated or glorified violence in the name of their team. But these groups were very small, very small, and that paired with the impunity, and this is very important, with the impunity of the 1968 crowd crush, that gave the police the power to enforce brutality among these groups, these small groups. But what happens? The police doesn't discriminate. The police thinks that every single one of the thousands that go to the stadium are part of these violent groups. Whilst we now know that 95% of the people go to a stadium to be entertained. But during those 40 years between 1970 and 2000, we had almost 200 deaths without having an incident. It was like a dripping of police brutality, also in fights between fans, infighting between the same fans. So eventually, when democracy came back in 1985, 83, and when, with the help of a lot of, when human rights started again to have presence in Argentinian society, at the end of 1990s, the government started to say, 10 years later than Europe, 10 years later than what happened in Europe, what Peter told us about Hillsborough, the government said, okay, we have a problem. We have to start to make some legislation. That was, and they started, and they created a very small special unit, and the guns were taken, the firearms were banned for everybody, of course. For fans, it was always banned, but the police from 1998, the police wouldn't take firearms to the stadiums, but we still had these less lethal weapons that, like tear gas, water cannon, horses, dogs, etc. And after that initial move, nothing much happened for another 10 years. 10 years later, in 2010, with a government that had an interesting, I wouldn't like to, an interesting but sometimes contradictory perspective onto human rights. There was a very big change regarding security in Argentina, and they created a ministry of security after some wild repression we experienced in other, not in football. Football was still violent, but after a very big repression that had to do with social rights, housing rights, which is also a human right. The president at that time decided to put a woman in charge of the Ministry of Security, and immediately after that, River Plate was relegated, and that created a really, really big. I don't like to say riot, because it also was derived from bad policing, but the people were angry, and the police kind of how would I say this? The police started poking on them, like, oh, you were relegated, and from a very little incident, suddenly the whole stadium was like not the whole stadium, sorry, like thousands of people were really angry, and they started burning property, and the police, of course, scaled the things, and the clashes became bigger and bigger. But the good thing was that we didn't have any deaths, and that had to do because before that, the government had taken firearms out, and because of the perspective of the government regarding policing of protests in the streets. In football, we also didn't have tear gases to be used. So the thing didn't escalate that much. But the truth is that from that moment, and this Ministry of Security said, okay, we need a change. And the change basically adopted a lot of things from other models from other countries, particularly in Britain. Like, we have to lower the profile of the police. The truth is that before 2010, the police was the lord of the stadium. And that is a problem, because police knows about policing. They don't know about crowd management. And you have to incorporate techniques which have been developed in other countries and FIFA itself has incorporated to their recommendations to make much more emphasis on crowd management than on policing. Because if you plan taking into account crowd science and how the crowd moves, you will be able to avoid policing altogether. Of course, you have to better the police, creating units. And the last thing I want to do, we are in a path, and going to a stadium today in Argentina is very much different from 20 years ago, but we still have incidents with less lethal weapons. For example, in 2013, a police officer triggered a rubber bullet shotgun inches away from a Lanús supporter, from a Lanús as a team, and we ended up with a nationwide away ban, a ban for away fans, which is still in place. And in the past, in 2022, there was a similar incident as the one in Kanjuruhan, where a fan died, and it had to do with tear gas. The tear gas was deployed outside of the stadium, but it rolled under the tribune, and the gas went in, with that to trigger a mass evacuation and a crowd crush on a door. We had only one victim. It was really bad, but you can see that we are still having really big problems, but we are getting better. The last thing I want to say is victims and organizations, it's very important for you not to enter in this loop we entered in 1970s. It's very important that you demand and pressure for there not being impunity, because if not, the police will think that, oh, nothing happened, and we continue. It's very important. That happened to us, and we had a lot of years. And I'm sure that people like Ricky, I know that it hurt. Well, I can't even imagine. Sorry, I don't know. But I'm sure it has to hurt a lot. But I'm sure that his main aim is that it doesn't happen again. And if you want, in the comments or in some questions, we can talk about some things that from social society you can influence government and what we did. Okay, so thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Eric. That's absolutely, I'll take it from here. Thank you, Eric. Thank you for taking us once again through this timeline, which once again to me highlights the amount of time that these processes take, and kind of that midterm to long-term perspective one has to take. We're going to open up for questions. So I want to encourage anyone who has a question or a comment to add it to the chat, and it can be to any of the 5 speakers. Indicate if it's for one in particular, or if it's maybe for all of them. And I understand that Pete might have to leave a little bit earlier, so I will use my power as moderator to ask a first question and maybe ask Pete if he can reply first, if that's okay. But it's for everyone. I think to me, what strikes me the most, besides how long and difficult these processes are, is how lonely perhaps it can be, and the necessity, and I truly believe in kind of networks and community coming together. And I believe that that is how, we can have an impact. And so we've seen here the actions of family, of lawyers, maybe the importance of media to be involved positively, which is not always. And so I'm wondering if you have any reflections, Pete, of who are actors that we are not keeping in mind, or we don't know about, we wouldn't know, that are key to one of the many roles that we need, right? There's the parts of advocacy, there's legal support, there's this changing of narratives. Are there folks that we need more to be involved more, or that we might, that might be work behind the scenes and we are not aware, that are part of this process?
Well, first of all, it's a great question, Laura. I think the answer is to cast the net as widely as possible. But the starting point, and I can't emphasize this too much, the starting point is not to put too much emphasis on lawyers like me or politicians who have been dreadful sometimes and brilliant at other times, or the media. The real emphasis and the whole heart of it, and it's really very obvious, is the families themselves always. And that in successful campaigns across the piece, it's those who are most affected, most viscerally affected by disaster and scandals that must lead the way, and they must be the central advocates. People like me, we're just the engineers, we're the plumbers, we're the ones that can bring some technical help to it. Politicians sometimes can be very useful, and certainly in the things that I've spoken to, they've been the best and the worst. And currently, we have got some politicians who've really led the way and broken down some doors, which is great. We need them as well. And the media, there's one particular media outlet owned by Rupert Murdoch in the UK called The Sun, which was right at the centre of the cover-up in the Hillsborough tragedy, and still to this day in Liverpool, ordinary people will not allow the Sun to be sold in shops because of what they did, the lies that they told about Hillsborough. So I think that's the answer, is never to lose sight of the fact that the families are at the heart of it, and it's the families campaign that really changed things in terms of the UK and all of the campaigns behind Hillsborough Law, because very sadly there's a whole train of other people who've been dealt a similar hand in different sorts of circumstances. But all of those are family-led campaigns as well, and that's where the real struggle lies.
Thank you. I'm wondering if any of the other speakers would like to take that question.
I'm thinking about the question. I'm thinking how I can put something into it. Looking forward, I believe that there is a need to engage with. I don't know if to engage, but maybe to foster a group of people that attain knowledge, proper technical knowledge on crowd management and things that, and study things that happened in other places, in order to be able to engage with government. Of course, you have to keep on pressuring and demanding, but you have to also find spaces where you can engage with government and influence policy. And that comes in hand with, look, there is one thing that is terrible about this. It's 125 people that died, but I'm sure in their families, and there are people that you might find people that turn that rage and that need, of course, and right for, and the best thing they can do is study a bit, study and get knowledge regarding crowd management and what happened in other places, in order to gather like a knowledge with which you can engage with government and influence policy. There are hundreds of ways. For example, international aid. I participated in programs with this Ministry of Security that changed things. I was in a little organization which was invited to participate in a project that was funded by the Dutch embassy. I know that right now international aid is difficult, but and I'm putting myself at the level of Indonesia. I think Indonesia has a lot of things are funded from outside. The thing is that you have to keep demanding justice and lawyers, etc., pressuring the government, but at the same time you have to find some kind of ecosystem, technical ecosystem, that will influence policing and will influence change for the future. I believe getting in touch with crowd management professionals and other associations in Europe, particularly in Europe, there's the Football Fan Association in the UK. They might give you a hand in order to get knowledge, to propose, not only demand, which is necessary, but you have to propose.
Absolutely, that propositional kind of take rather than the demand. I think Nadine, you wanted to come in as well.
Sure. Would love to. And I'm actually just trying to echo between Pete and also Eric, in regards to strategic echo chambers, if I may put it that way. Pete has echoed before, flagging before that the role of the family victims and the victims itself is the central role for the whole long-term advocacy, not only the short-term one. While Eric is also highlighting how there should be strategic partnerships beyond our echo chambers. For example, those who can be engaged in political positions, for example, who can affect or who can involve in political parties, who then can affect the whole the starting of the failure system, but it can then change throughout time. But I'm just echoing here from the both sides, from our previous speakers, is that the main thing is not to be swayed by any misinformation or any misnarratives. Because what happened now in Indonesia, and I can tell you also in Southeast Asia, for example, um, family victims who are striving for justice through many protest acts now occurred in Indonesia and also in Southeast Asia. They're now portrayed, for example, as foreign agents, but the state or other actors who are shaping these narratives is not looking deeper into what actually um what actually proposes or what actually creates the protest itself, what creates the whole advocacy itself. And by saying that we are only foreign agents, for example, and any of those misnarratives, us as civil society organizations, us as a part of the ones who are giving our utmost, um, not pressure, but support to the family victims, should also be supported for those who have the capacity to protect the good narratives that we are advocating. Journalists, for example, youth-led organizations, other youth-based organizations. And I have also always stated this in many forums, that the one who has always been succeeding in gaining justice is not state actors. At the end, it's always the civilians. So us trying to push as much as we can for the family victims of Kanjuruhan, whatever that might be hampers in in their way, is the best practical solution for us to give to them. Platforms like this, for example, is keeping the Kanjuruhan tragedy existing. And then also we're inviting also a lot of journalists who are also online in the live stream of Contrast's YouTube. When you are keeping the Kanjuruhan existing, the Kanjuruhan tragedy existing, you are keeping the whole narrative of there are a lot of problems in Indonesia. Hence, there should be a lot of solidarity being done, also existing. So that's what maybe I can flag out, Laura, from Pete and also Eric.
Thank you so much, Nadine. And I think this kind of conversation about misinformation or narrative to me brings another kind of example of how talking about Kanjuruhan also speaks to a lot of the challenges and misunderstandings about protests. Because I think there's a true damage when folks will say most protests are very violent, when we know that the percentage of those are very small, but they're the ones that get the most, perhaps, media attention. And when we speak about violence, why did this conflict begin? Many times it has to do with this kind of very violent and very punitive response from police, who are the ones that hold, these dangerous and many times lethal weapons. So the challenges and the damage that these recurring narratives have show that importance of pushing back against that. We have a couple more minutes for questions, just a couple. I want to just take a pause and see if anyone from the panelists has final thoughts, something they really wanted to say and didn't get to, or anyone from our audience that has a burning question.
I would just like to say something about the misinformation, which I'm sure Pete knows really well about regarding related with Hillsborough. For example, misinformation sometimes comes from of course, from the actors, of course, and the media, and it will only be debunked with knowledge and with studying the issue of crowd dynamics and things like that. For example, there is a word that Laura said at the beginning, or maybe it was in the preparation room, that was stampede. For example, everybody talks about stampedes when technically it's a crowd crush. And why do they say stampede? Because if we say stampede, it's their action that killed them. Okay, that is a good example. So that is why I believe that in order to move forward, you have to gather a team of people that it doesn't have to be academic, but there's a lot of stuff. I don't know. John Drury is a very renowned social psychologist, or Keith Still. There is a lot of material online, and you will be able to debunk a lot of these myths by knowing your stuff. And I believe that is important. I know everybody got jobs, everybody got families, but maybe within contrast, you can have a little team or with the victims together, and because information and knowledge will always debunk. It will be easier to debunk myths that might be interested, but sometimes they are incorporated in culture, because we're used to blaming the victim. Okay, that's what I wanted to say about misinformation.
Thank you, Eric. That was great. And now I know about the stampede. It's so easy to not understand that effect. So I so appreciate. That's great.
They died asphyxiated and standing in the place, or it's not a stampede. It's a crowd crush. They were doing what they were expected to do. They were trying to leave the stadium, and by some reason they started to compress. It's the opposite. But if you say stampede, oh, it's their fault because they ran. Okay.
Yeah, it sets these expectations.
It's a
good. Yeah. Pete, I see your hand up. We're glad to step back here.
And you're right, Laura. I have to go back into court on another case that I'm doing, I'm afraid. But before I do, I think we're all very much on the same page here, and I just want to draw a couple of threads together, if I may. My point was that it's often forgotten that the families are the centre of a campaign, and real change isn't handed out. Real change is caused by proper campaigning and families and survivors and their supporters leading those campaigns. But I'll also pick up what Eric and Nadine have been saying. So just going back to my experience with the UEFA panel, not only have I been representing victims and survivors of Hillsborough and various other things, but also I was on the international panel which looked into what happened in Paris in 2022. And there was regrettably almost a completely copied narrative of what had happened at Hillsborough. All of the same elements were there, and all of the same lies and false narratives were put forward. And again, it was those who were there that pushed, and the review was only set up because of that campaign. But once the review was set up, we had the former Sports Minister of Portugal chairing it. I was on the panel. We had two senior police officers, one still serving from the Netherlands and one from Scotland. But we also had a professor of crowd behaviour who specialises in football crowds. So we did have that wide range of expertise on that panel. And not only were we therefore able to debunk the lies that were being told, and they were the same lies, it was fans turning up with tickets, no they weren't. Fans turning up late, no they weren't. Fans being drunk, no they weren't. And we could prove all of that. But we also made 21 recommendations about how things must never happen again. And UEFA, through clenched teeth at the end of the review, agreed to follow those and put those recommendations into into force. And if they've told the truth about that, then it should mean that that sort of crowd crush or potential crowd crush, not a stampede, Eric, I completely agree, shouldn't happen again, certainly at least in Europe. And I would hope that the learnings from that thing. But Eric's quite right. We need to proactively get our campaigns turned into expertise to change the future. We can't change the past. We can get some semblance of justice for the past, but we need to progress for the future. So I fully endorse that. And on that note, I'm afraid, Laura and Nadine and everybody else, I'm very sorry to leave slightly early, but I'm afraid I have to. So thank you very much for the invite, and it's been really important, I think, and please stay in touch.
Thank you so much, Pete. We really appreciate you coming in the middle of a busy day. I want to extend that thank you as well to the other panelists, whether it's very early or in the middle of a really, really tough day of remembrance and action as well. I think I want to, in echo and in acknowledgement by Pete of what we said of the importance of centering families, and that any change will not be given, but will be a result of this kind of tireless fight. I think it's more than necessary and important for us to kind of close with Rizal, who would like to speak and do a call for us to close this event.
Ya, selamat malam semuanya. Saya keluarga korban Jaringan Solidaritas Keadilan Korban Kanjuruhan. 3 tahun tragedi Kanjuruhan tanpa keadilan. Kematian massal pada tragedi Kanjuruhan telah memasuki 3 tahun. Kematian yang terjadi pada tanggal 1 Oktober 2022 mengakibatkan 135 orang meninggal dunia, 44 diantaranya anak di bawah umur, dan 31 lainnya adalah perempuan dewasa. Kematian orang tua kami dan saudara kami adalah akibat dari tindakan brutalitas aparat kepolisian yang melakukan penembakan gas air mata secara membabi buta. Kematian orang tua kami dan saudara-saudara kami, pelakunya hanya dihukum dengan hukuman yang sangat ringan, 1 tahun 6 bulan kepada Panpel AKP Hasdarmawan dan Ki 3 Brimob, 1 tahun kepada Suko Sutrisno, Security Officer, dan vonis bebas kepada Kompol Wahyu Setyo Kasat Samapta Polres Malang dan AKBP Bambang Sidik Kabakop Polres Malang. Pada tingkat kasasi, Mahkamah Agung memberikan vonis kepada Kompol Wahyu Setyo dan AKBP Bambang Sidik masing-masing 2 tahun 6 bulan penjara. Itu pun yang dihukum hanya pelaku level bawah. Sedangkan pelaku level atas hingga saat ini belum tersentuh oleh hukum, bahkan hanya menyalakan angin sebagai sebab dari kematian korban tragedi Kanjuruhan. Sudah 3 tahun tragedi Kanjuruhan, hari demi hari sudah kami lewati. Keluarga korban tragedi Kanjuruhan tidak pernah berhenti dan menyerah memperjuangkan keadilan hingga kami mendapatkan hak kami untuk mendapatkan kebenaran, keadilan, dan pemulihan. Perlu kami sampaikan, selama 3 tahun ini kami sering mendapatkan teror dengan aparat, sering menghubungi atau bahkan sering mendatangi rumah kami, baik itu dari Polres hingga Polsek, dengan alasan silaturahmi. Hal tersebut membuat kami tidak nyaman. Perlu kami tegaskan bahwa yang kami inginkan adalah keadilan. Harapan kami sebagai keluarga korban keadilan tragedi Kanjuruhan, semoga keadilan ini tidak terulang kembali di masa yang akan datang di daerah yang lain ketika kasus ini belum terselesaikan. Pastinya tindakan negara ataupun aparat akan terus mengulangi hal yang sama di masa yang akan datang. Mari kita tetap merawat ingatan dan merajut solidaritas lewat forum diskusi internasional ini. Kami juga berharap pada atensi dari internasional untuk mendorong kasus tragedi Kanjuruhan ini sebagai pelanggaran HAM berat. Terima kasih semuanya.
Thank you so much, Rizal. We stand in solidarity with you. We acknowledge your bravery. We hope that those of you who are here hear this as a challenge to continue to accompany you and fight for this. There's a role that all of us can take. So thank you so much for that. I want to thank everyone who participated. I want to thank our wonderful interpreter who did an excellent work. And we look forward to seeing you in spaces around the world to continue to fight for justice. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you very much for having me. It was very, very nice to be with you.
Thank you, Eric. Let's stay in touch.
Of course.
Okay. We have, oh, sorry.